Okay, this is Fahim Willis. He's going to give us a brief overview of his program.
Yeah, so the title of the program is Elevating the Game, and it was born out of just self-assessment. You know, why did I exhibit the behaviors that I exhibited? Why did I make the choices that I made? And then it expanded later to people. But the gist of it is, how do we combine academia and real world experiences, right? And so an example of that is, I can have a room full of people who may not have the understanding of what filters are, what motivational interviewing is. So I would run the translation, right? So a filter is simply the experiences and circumstances that we've encountered that shape the way that we perceive and think about things. Now, when I deliver it to people that way, there was an impact in what they were able to receive. So the goal of my program is to have a call for self-examination, right? And to be self-efficient, right? How do we consistently put our self in a place to make the best decisions for ourselves, right? So from a street perspective, a gentleman once told me when I was younger that a player never makes a move that is disadvantageous to his or herself. And what I took from that statement was that when we talk about right or wrong, when we talk about how we perceive things, right? My question to my clients is always, how is that working for you, right? Because if you can answer how that's working for you and you're not satisfied with that, then we can consistently make adjustments, right? And like my best friend used to always say to me, you know, when you have problems, when you have issues, right, make adjustments, right? You don't need to pity yourself. You don't need to boo-hoo, but you really need to make adjustments in real time that give you real world results. And I really think that, especially for, I don't want to categorize it as black and brown people, because it's people issues, right? How do we deal with other people when we don't have an effective way of dealing with ourselves, right? So if I have a misperception of myself, then how could I ever have a true picture of you, right? So how do we create a system that allows us to assess, make adjustments, and then act on the adjustments that we made? So I want to be able to articulate that inside of the program.
It all starts with self.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. And then as it begins with self, how do we have the courage to, how can I respect yourself when yourself may be different from mine, right? So how am I really not threatened by that, right? So inside of the industry, right, they teach us that, okay, well, these are differences and so forth, or when they use a term like conflict resolution, right? Well, what is that really, right? If I have an issue with you and you have an issue with me, and that issue is not rooted in the thing that occurred, but in the filter that I'm using to make the assessment, then you'll never come out with an appropriate answer that makes sense, right? Because the vision is already, it's not appropriate in the sense that you don't have a real need to satisfy, right, the correct thing. You really just want to get off yourself, right? As long as I can appease myself and make myself cool, then I'm okay. Well, that's not really how we see each other, right? So
there's a certain amount of humility that we have to embrace before we can move forward.
Absolutely. But then we have to qualify that for the person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
And I just use those examples because a lot of times in the language I love you, right? Well, I've seen people harm people that they love.
Yes.
Right? I've seen people talk disrespectfully to people that they love.
Yes.
So I'm not going to say that you don't love me, but I'm just going to say your rendition and my rendition isn't the same.
Okay.
So a lot of times we don't seek clarity. You know, we're really seeking safety, right? And peace for ourselves, but we don't understand that we may be involved in our own trauma.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so Fahim,
yes,
when we talk about your program, Okay, you talk about, some of the issues, but, really, what is it you're trying to achieve for the people who go through your program?
I want them to not be afraid of the difficulties of dealing with themselves, right? And that seems very abstract, but I was a troubled youth, and I found myself making decisions, right, out of a cry for love and a need for help, but I didn't know how to articulate that, right? And then when I'm put in situations with adults, and it was like, I came from an era of children I seen and not heard, right? Or do as I say and not as I do.
Right.
So there was a conflict of interest built in me. So what I hope to give people is, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to not know. It's okay to be confused. What's not okay is to be trapped in that space. So I want to be able to provide mental, physical, and spiritual tools that develop, right, self-progression. In other words, how do you not self-diagnose in the sense that, well, this is the issue, how do I feel about that? But like me, for instance, when are you going to go to the doctor for a checkup and you're not feeling well? So you're going to complain every day about not feeling well, but you don't exercise any methodology for correcting that issue. Why? Right? Even in the mental health industry, we don't go see doctors. We don't believe, we're not crazy, ain't nothing wrong with my head. But if you have a difficulty with an issue, have you ever had something on your mind? An example that I like is, have you ever been somewhere by yourself and then your mind jumps on you and it's like it brings up a memory or an idea that was harmful or past events, and then it's like the mice on the wheel, it just keeps running and running. And it's like, have you ever just said to yourself, well, damn, won't you be quiet?
So,
Right.
So that's a trauma response, though, isn't it?
It absolutely is. But the thing becomes, what's the next step, and what's the next step that makes it okay? Because sometimes you just have to admit that you're the problem, right? And we have to have, you have to have the courage to, and you have to have no, you just have to have a willingness to want to be better.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so if we go through your program, describe what the program activities are or could be, and I realize that this is just conceptual, so you don't have to necessarily have all the answers, but if I am in your program, what is that going to look like for me from start to finish? So that's one thing. So operationally, what does that look like? But most importantly, from a value perspective, what am I going to get out of this? What's going to be transformative for me that will help me to do what I could not do before and make me more productive? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the first thing operationally, what we want to do is I'm not inventing the wheel in the sense that we want to take basic things, journaling, right? How we communicate with ourselves, right? And then we have specific journals, right? And those journals are broken into categories across human composition, right? Mind, body, and spirit, right? So when we talk about, Elevating the Game has a premise that says we all have appetites, but how those appetites are translated for us will determine what we eat, right? So operationally, right, when we talk about the body, what the body eats isn't what the soul eats, right? What the soul eats isn't what the mind eats, right? So how do we understand who we are, right? And then how do we begin to move that into a space where we can work on it, right? So the value, right, is in, so as a young man, I came across people who cared, right? And those people who cared took that extra step. They didn't allow me to be quiet, right? They didn't allow me not to think about myself and the actions that I committed, right, that put me in the position that I was in. But then they didn't leave me with that sour taste. They gave me tools of expressions. Well, what do you like, young man, right? What are the tools that you think you need? And as I had to ponder these questions in a structured environment, it had me doing things that I would have never done on my own.
On your own.
Right? So sometimes We want to go back to basic principles of, each one teach one, right? Ms. Valerie, what have you learned in your experience, in your life, right? That the philosophy has always been with me that someone else may carry a piece to your puzzle.
Right.
Right? And so through dialogue, through written expression, and then through exercise of specific categories. I don't want to control your religious belief, right? But if you're a Muslim and you don't know anything about the Quran or you don't know anything about the Hadith, then what are you practicing? If you're a Christian and you've never opened the Bible,
Right.
right? What is it that you believe and what is it that you're practicing? So we want to move people out of theory into a real application of, I'm having an issue here. I may not even know what that issue is, but what tools can I use to examine? And then once I examine, right, how do we determine the pieces in that we need to make adjustments with? And then how do we turn that into an executable piece in our life, either as a thought or habit, right? You're not going to get rid of diabetes, right? Because you think you want to be well, right? You have to have a physical regimen. You have to have a dietary regimen, right? I'm not going to tell you what that is. Your body is already told.
Okay, so one more question.
Okay.
I know we are getting ready to leave. When we talk about the value, who would take this program and how can it help them? Will it help people in their workspace? Will it help people with their relationships? Exactly why are you doing this work and to what end? What will people be able to do that they couldn't do before starting?
Well, I think that, I don't think that knowledge is power, right? I think the application of what you know can make you powerful. And so the goal for Elevating the Game isn't to tell you what's right or what's wrong, but it's to consistently challenge you to look at yourself, to look at your environment, right? And take authority and responsibility for your position, right? And when you can take authority for yourself and your position, then you will always be able to, I want the client to always be in a safe space where, one, they're confident in themselves, and that, two, not necessarily possess the knowledge, but be willing to go get it, right? So we want the end result to be a willingness to dialogue with yourself and someone else, right, in an effort, right, to be better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, and we'll talk about this some more.
Okay.
I'm going to end this now,
Cool beans.
but I have some thoughts, and we'll explore that later.
Cool, babe.
All right, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
All right, okay, bye-bye.
And that's what I want to do. What I